I'm Helen Borton, and this is A Sense of Place from PRI, Public Radio International.
Even though people considered it a gadget and primitive, the player piano actually was the first computer. The capability was there as a musical instrument with its own ways of composing that were never before thought of because of the way you could cut in notes that people couldn't play, at speeds they couldn't play.
This is the story of a composer obsessed by time, a pioneer who blazed a trail to the future by using an instrument that sounded like the past. Before radio, before talkies, when records were tinny parodies of live performance, the actual sounds of the player piano captivated America. Jazz from the bordellos of New Orleans, blues shimmering like heat on the Mississippi Delta, music from the concert stage. One could hear Jelly Roll Morton or Rachmaninoff in the family parlor. In restaurants and penny arcades, in stores and saloons, automatic pianos leaped into action, triggered not by fingers, but by a moving roll of perforated paper.
They could add notes in such a way that there was a lot going on that people were aware of. In other words, you can create very thick, lugubrious scoring, which you can't define what's happening, or you could create these transparent textures that are very energetic and rhythmic and exciting, and that's what they discovered how to do. It's using the player piano as a medium that is not human performance, that's not necessarily a machine, but it's some kind of strange hybrid creature.
Using digital technology, pianist scholar Artis Wodehouse has resurrected the roll arrangements of George Gershwin and others on the Nonesuch label. In the cubicles of Tin Pan Alley, Gershwin joined scores of song pluggers banging out piano rolls for the booming industry. Simply by punching more holes, arrangers could create walls of sound and lightning tempos beyond the reach of human fingers. By the 1920s, the mechanical music boom was at its height. Then, radio and new recording techniques changed everything. The player piano died, or so we thought. In an obscure corner of Mexico City, behind the thick locked door of a soundproof, home-built studio, electrifying new music was springing from the keys of the antiquated instrument.
Nancarrow had such an odd feeling about his music. He always gave this air of not caring whether anybody heard it or not. Yoko told me that she asked him once what she should do with all the player piano rolls when he died, and he said burn them.
He could be in an island and continue composing his music. He will never stop. If you put Conlon Nancarrow with his piano players in an island and have some fish and fruits, and he will continue to produce exactly the same.
Who was Conlon Nancarrow? Why did this American composer live in Mexico? How did he make his music? A full understanding of what was going on in that hermetically sealed room would not emerge for 30 years.
When I go to a studio, the smell of the studio transports me to when I was a little kid. The little door up in the roof, and it had like a mesh, and I broke the mesh and I'd open it and I'd go in when he wasn't there. I like to take my friends and show them the studio because it was so. Some of them thought it was scary. It was full of, spider webs and dust, and it was like a haunted house.
He was creating amazing conceptions of time. He was creating cathedrals of time. And I questioned to Conlon about his feeling on time. I said, do you have a physical or a mathematical idea of time? What do you prefer? And says, I prefer time as it should be, not as it is. And that was the identification with Bach. Yeah? He wanted to control time.
Mexican composer Julio Estrada was a close friend, but it took years before Nancarrow would talk about his music.
He wanted to talk about politics, for instance. He wanted to talk about daily things, about maybe literature. But when you came into music, that was not necessary for him. One of the most interesting conversations was about the difference between Bach and Mozart. Mozart's oriented to physics. That's why Einstein preferred Mozart's music instead of Bach, because the music was moving as the universe. In Bach, the time is just a mathematical conception. And that was very interesting philosophy, because that divides composers between dogs and cats, yes?
Conlon Nancarrow was born to wealthy parents in Texarkana, Arkansas in 1912. An ardent admirer of Louis Armstrong, Earl Hines, Art Tatum, and Karl Marx, he played jazz trumpet and absorbed radical politics in his teens. He went to Boston to study serious composition and there joined the Communist Party. At 20, with typical impulsiveness, he married a 16-year-old music student.
I first laid eyes on Nan in the tragically short-lived Washington Battalion. Handsome, sporting a meticulously groomed black Van Dyke beard, he was resolutely non-communicative.
It was 1937, and at 25, Nancarrow had already impressed major composers with his talent. He left all that behind to fight against Franco and the fascists in the Spanish Civil War. By then, he and his wife had separated. One day, the battalion commander learned he was a musician.
Mirko strode up to Nan's bunk. "You, blow bugle." Nan protested he didn't remember how. Reveille, the next morning, was the most mellifluous rendering of those normally jarring notes we had ever heard. From then on, until we left for the front, Nan would stand poised on a hill above town and blow bugle. About 5 minutes before taps, all the raucous barracks turned quiet, waiting. Ed Lending.
After 2 years of fighting in the trenches, sickness and starvation, an emaciated Nancarrow returned from the war. He settled in New York City and resumed composing. His reputation continued to grow. The foretaste of success lasted barely a year. He was publicly mortified by a fatally unrehearsed performance of his septet. Then, his request for a passport, his had been confiscated abroad, was denied because of his membership in the Communist Party. Outraged, he moved to Mexico and renounced his American citizenship. A critic would write, "In Nancarrow's hands, the player piano became a demonic beast." He came across the novel idea in a book by Henry Cowell, but couldn't afford to act upon it. He lived frugally on odd jobs, money from home, and, he claimed, his poker winnings. In 1947, a family legacy gave the young expatriate the chance he was waiting for. He went to New York, bought a player piano and roll-punching machine, and met his second wife. As it turned out, it was the musical marriage that lasted.
Once I had a discussion with Copland. He said, he was discussing this thing of electronic or mechanical or whatever, music.
This is Nancarrow speaking to Charles Amerkanian in 1977.
And he said, I go to a concert, and to me it's so exciting. No, he said, I don't want the first horn to miss the note, but the fact that he might miss it, the tension of might miss it. No, but I told him, I said, well, I'd rather have a good recording where he hit the note. No, he said, that's very boring.
Now, back in Mexico, the fear of clumsy performance could be banished forever. Suddenly, he had more notes at his disposal than hands have fingers, the crisp metallic sound he loved, and unerring precision. He began to experiment with the simultaneous interplay of many different rhythms, often at high speeds.
I can take a beat and, like, say to every 3 clicks, I want to put 4 clicks.
By snapping his fingers, composer and music critic Kyle Gann demonstrates the asymmetrical relationships, the clash of tempos that fascinated Nancarrow.
And that's 3 against 4. I can do 4 against 5. I mean, everybody's been on an old bus at some point that had 2 windshield wipers that don't go the same tempo. And they start out on the same side, and then they get out of sync for a while, and they eventually get back into sync. And that's the musical phenomenon that runs mostly through his music. But the real payoff comes later when he's got 3 or 4 lines going, but slightly separated in time, and the time keeps stretching. They get further and further apart. Piece starts off, bang, everything hits on the same note. You hear almost chords, and they start becoming arpeggios, and then finally they get so far separated, and the music changes into something else, and then at some point the tempos switch, and they start coming back together again.
Like fragments of memory, familiar American idioms weave through these daring combinations. Blues and jazz seem to sweet-talk us into the eye of a hurricane. He bought a second piano and covered the wood hammers of one with metal, the felt hammers of the other with leather studded with metal snaps. Tricky rhythms and cascading scales, the over-the-top duet arrangements of Tin Pan Alley had punched walls of sound into piano rolls. So Nancarrow's ferocious counterpoint added layer upon layer of complexity to his player-piano studies. Perhaps the impulse to defy human limits was the stubborn expatriate's most American trait of all. 17 years after the breakup of his second marriage, the composer met Japanese-born archaeologist Yoko Sugiura, then a graduate student, at a party.
And he came to visit me, and I still remember what clothes he was wearing. I remember everything. He opened the door, and just, I don't know what it was. It's kind of like a lightning. It's like a lightning struck to me.
Now, he was much older than you.
Yes, but I think his way of thinking was so revolutionary, so young, probably much younger than I was even.
There's one piece in which the tempos are at a ratio of E to pi. If you have two tempos, a relationship of 4 to 5, then they're going to come back and coincide every 5 beats in one and every 4 beats in the other. So that makes you compose a certain way. If you've got two tempo relationships E to pi, they're never going to coincide, theoretically, because those are irrational numbers. And by changing those, something as simple as those numbers, he would all of a sudden have to come up with a new language for what he was doing.
He had a swimming pool that he couldn't use it, no? He converted it into a fish pond. Small carps like this. And then one day it occurred to him, he wanted to try. He wanted to try the carps, the little things. So he said he cooked it, he broiled it, but he said, I could hardly eat it because there were so many bones. He was so funny. He wanted to try everything.
Tens of thousands of books on music, astronomy, psychology, math, cooking, sex, literature filled the shelves of his library. He taught himself yoga and Chinese. The May-December romance quickly led to marriage, and at 58, Nancarrow became a father for the first time.
I was paralyzed for 6 months. When Marco was born, I was paralyzed. So Conlon wake up during the night every 2 hours to feed the baby and to bathe the baby. He did everything, and yet he had never had any experience for the baby. He never complained, never. He is not the kind of person who complains.
The composer operated the stiff lever of the punching machine by hand, developing a powerful forearm. After hours standing on the cement floor in a dank corridor outside the studio, his hands were purple with cold. It could take 6 months to make a piano roll for a 5-minute piece. If time was Nancarrow's obsession, the canon, a form based on the repeated, staggered overlapping of a single melody, was the framework that held its whirling intricacies together. In the interview with Americanian, he explains why.
It's easier to follow the temporal changes. If it's the same melody, you don't have to follow the melody. You're just hearing the temporal relationship. I don't have much of a melodic imagination or invention. I mean, it's easier for me. I only have to do the melody once. A 4-part canon, it's just one melody.
But controlling time on a player piano is one thing.
It's very strange. I don't know. Probably it's a defense mechanism for Conlon. Is that past is past, impenetrable in certain things. Often when I asked, when I was much younger, about his former girlfriend, who knows what, he said, well, that's a morbid curiosity. He said, why you have such a...
Ontology is the branch of philosophy which deals with the nature of being. Nancarrow said he thought of this relentless canon as the ticking of an ontological clock.
John Cage had come down to Mexico City to visit Conlon many times. Conlon would say to him, so you choose notes by chance. Would you ever choose mushrooms like that? And Cage said, no, you could die from that. And Conlon said, well.
Eva Soltis would participate in a series of events soon to break the silence surrounding the cataracts of sound hidden away on a quiet residential street in Mexico City. Leading composers, fully grasping its originality, actively promoted Nancarrow's works. John Cage played a tape for Merce Cunningham. The choreographer used it for a dance piece. Scores were published. Bit by bit, the music world was waking to the wealth of invention hidden in the paper rolls that honeycombed the shelves in Nancarrow's studio.
When I go on a trip, my mother would write like 15 pages, and my father would write down, well, your mother already wrote down everything that has to be said, so love, papi.
His mother said, please write me that I am all right, because I'm very worrying about how you have been doing. So since then, Conlon did, I'm all right, and sent the post to the mother.
He was not indifferent to recognition. He enjoyed that, but he didn't need it. He didn't need it. For him to have an audience of 1,000 people or to having one person was exactly the same.
Whatever I thought I wanted to do, he'd say, do it. The only thing I could not do was walk on top of his soundproof room. I could burn down the house as long as I let him be in peace and compose.
He was politically cantankerous. He was very far left and disgusted with politics, but he kept up with it all the time. And I think he was a real hedonist. He loved really good food. He used to drink much of the day.
Strong in drinking, strong and smoking, anything. For him, there is nothing in between, or whether black or white.
He said it took him 3 times to get it right, and he adored Yoko. She was the light of his life.
He was an extraordinary friend. If some people called him, he always had his door open. His door was always open for everyone, for everyone.
And very modest. He was a very modest person.
Do you think he knew his own worth?
Oh, yes. That I think, yes. Because often I talked with him, Conlon, but how many years you have been working like this? You'll see, he said. You'll see. After I died, you'll see.
Recording crews found their way to the soundproof room. First, there was a Columbia LP. Then, the complete studies for player piano were issued on a small label. Eva Soltis became his manager and organized a European tour. And, for the first time in 34 years, Conlon Nancarrow returned to his native land.
And it was during the hostage crisis in Iran. And we got up to the embassy that was, fully guarded. Conlon looked up and laughed and said, gee, do you think they'll find the bomb? And I sort of just gently pushed him through the metal detector and said, oh, here, he's just joking.
He could have kept on without accepting all the offers of going out. He said, I accept that because so that my son doesn't think that his father is a bomb. I'm doing it for my son, he said.
In 1982, the MacArthur Foundation awarded him a $300,000 grant. Georgi Ligeti, a major figure in contemporary music, described Nancarrow's work as, quote, the best by any living composer. He began to receive commissions and to write for live performers again, a string quartet, a piece for pianist Ursula Oppens.
He was once in New York, and he was being interviewed, and he managed to answer almost every question with a yes or a no, but it was very funny nonetheless.
Conlon is very much misunderstood by many people. Sometimes he says a kind of thing, two words things. Conlon is very known with the two words. Behind that, the whole energy is hidden. Like many people said, he has a poker face. But behind that face, he just hides so many different emotions. It's very much a strain. He's, in a way, a very timid person. That's one of the reasons he never wanted to get out from anywhere. But when there are many people, he just can't bear very much without drinking. It's very much a pressure for him to be in a public place.
A few years later, in failing health, the composer wanted to come home permanently, but the State Department said he must forswear his radical past. Although he had long ago broken ranks with the Communist Party, he refused. In 1997, at the age of 84, Conlon Nancarrow died in Mexico City.
If I had the brains I have now, 15 years ago or so, I would have liked to find a way to communicate more with him. You know, when you're a teenager, you're thinking of going out with your friends and having a good time and meeting girls and this and that and worrying about school. So you're not really thinking about, you know, that he's not maybe going to be here forever. I mean, right now is when I would like him to be here.
I really admired very much a kind of person like him because I have never met him before nor after.
Today, the over 50 studies for player piano are widely regarded as an American masterwork, and their influence continues to grow. Kyle Gann.
He really creates an entire rhythmic technique for what could be a new language of music. We could spend the next 200 years working out all the implications of what he's done in the field of rhythm.
But I like to snoop around his studio a lot, and I did it when I was a little kid a lot. Touching his studio was the most sacred thing he had, I think, and it was untouchable. And I liked to go in there. It was nice. I don't know, maybe I was looking for my father's life.
I'm Helen Borton, producer of A Sense of Place.